I'm recording this for a friend. If anybody else finds any value to it, then that will just be an extra bonus. So here's what I wanted to share. Basically, we live in a time where there's lots of people running around with different solutions and ideas relating to the gospel, but they seem to miss some very obvious and very big problems in being able to see and perceive truth. So with that said, I'd like to begin by simply giving examples. Knowing something is a problem is simply not enough to fix it. You must know why or exactly what is broken to be able to fix something. So here's an example. My old truck would be a good example. So let's say that I loan it out, I hadn't seen it in a long time, and somebody has it, using it, and then I get a message saying the truck won't work. So I'm left scratching my head. Well, what's going on? I get another message from a mechanic, and he says, you need a new motor. Somebody else says, you need a new transmission. Somebody else says, well, there's no tires. And somebody else, you can picture any number of things. But the point is I truly don't know unless I can drill down to exactly what's not working. And let's just say that after I ask a bunch of questions, I come to realize the only problem is I'm out of gas. How silly would have it been to just, replace a motor, replace a transmission, spend all that money when the only problem was that it was actually out of gas? I believe that this example, as silly as it sounds, we can apply it to a real world example. We have a doctrine that teaches us that essentially the Bible is broken. I hear lots of interesting assumptions on how it's broke and what's broke, but I don't think we take seriously the scriptures that show us what broke and who broke it. So this doctrine actually begins and is expounded most detail in 1 Nephi chapter 13. And with a careful reading of these scriptures, it gives us some very important insights. First of all, it begins by explaining and showing the formation of the great and abominable church. It's with this church that they remove plenty. It says behold, they have taken away from the gospel of the Lamb many parts which are plain and most precious. So who did it? It was the great and abominable church. All right, so then if we keep reading, it gives us an insight on why they did it. It says that it may blind the eyes and harden the hearts. That's a real warning. Essentially, if we don't understand what they broke, this is the equivalent of a broken transmission. We can make the wrong assumptions, but our vehicle's not going anywhere. This is a very, very critical thing, that we have blind eyes and hard hearts. This to us should be a huge warning, because in these last days, the last thing in the world you want is blind eyes and hard hearts. We must be able to perceive and see truth. If you're following closely in your scriptures, you'll laugh because this is a little out of order, but I'm putting it this way to emphasize the way that Nephi starts the statements. He says, wherefore these things go forth from the Jews in purity unto the Gentiles. And he emphasizes by saying, according to the truth which is in God. He leaves no doubt that this was the corruption by the Gentiles, not the Jews. Therefore, the Old Testament, as we have it, is pure, and we should take it as serious as such. I think that I've seen way too many people that read way too many weird doctrines, and it doesn't back up in the scriptures when you compare to the Old Testament. There's patterns that just do not exist. There's doctrines that just are not supported, never expounded upon. This is a problem, and we should take it serious, because by reading into those things, we have blind eyes, hard hearts. An interesting example where we're reading into it things that are simply not there is the Articles of Faith. The Articles of Faith say that we believe the Bible to be the Word of God, as far as it's translated correctly. Well, we read into that the Bible is corrupted and shouldn't be trusted. It's not what it's saying. It's very clearly saying that the Bible is the Word of God and should be trusted. and actually emphasizes to the reader the original language has extra value. So an interesting addition to that thought is the way that it's Moroni records in Mormon chapter 9, where he states that if they could have written in Hebrew, then their record would have been perfect. It would have had no imperfection. That is very interesting to our minds for the importance of the Hebrew language in our gospel study, and yet we completely overlook it. One thing that seems a little confusing is, why did Joseph Smith even translate the Bible? The Joseph Smith translation of the Bible was, I would say, similar to, like an example that I would use is a vehicle's auto owner's manual is complete for its intended purpose. That was like the Bible. It really did have everything. Original language was there, relatively intact. It was delivered in purity, to use Nephi's words. But that doesn't mean that there wasn't more meaning and more information that God intends us to have. And that is why we have the Joseph Smith translation. That is Joseph adding information to the narrative, but that does not mean that he was lighting up the original text. It would be like, back to the vehicle example, it would be like, now we have the owner's manual, now we're doing some repair detail and from a repair manual and adding that information for us to know or be aware of. Here's an example of a plain and precious truth clearly being removed. The original language, well, first of all, it's Acts chapter 12, verse 4, and it's where we have the one use of the word Easter in the New Testament. If you look into the word Easter, it's actually the name of a pagan god, okay? With that said, what was the original? We have the ability now to simply go look at the Greek, and the Greek in that verse right there, the word would have been Passover, Pascha. So why did they replace Easter with Passover with Easter? Well, that is your example of a plain and precious truth very simply being removed. Why do that? Well, they did it to blind the eyes and harden the hearts. So in the law of Moses, chapter 23, Exodus chapter 23, we have this interesting verse. He's warning us, like, be circumspect and make no mention of the name of other gods, neither let them be heard out of thy mouth. I found it interesting enough when I went looking for that injunction, that warning, that where it comes is at the time that he's emphasizing keeping the other feasts. The problem with the use of Easter in the Gentile church by the great and abominable church, it was removing our hearts from the feast cycle and the feast that God gave to the house of Israel and intended for them to keep. And that is a very plain and very precious truth removed from the Bible. The teaching of Jesus Christ personally to the Nephites gives us several interesting examples to consider. Beginning in chapter 23, it shows us that Jesus did correct records. He asked them to bring forth the records that they had and asked if something was specifically in there. When it wasn't in there, he added it to the record. He had them add it. So he's correcting, he's adding something that's missing, and then he continues to add. He adds the teachings of Malachi in chapter 24 and 25. But the interesting thing is he inserts something in the middle of chapter 25. He says, remember ye the law of Moses, my servant, which I've commanded him in Horeb, for all Israel, with the statutes and judgments. So he's already shown us that if something's wrong or missing, he'll correct it. But he gives no warning here regarding the law of Moses. He actually emphasizes it. He not only emphasizes it, but he emphasizes it in regards to scriptures concerning the last days. In Malachi, we get really excited about the wicked being treaded down, and we get excited about sending Elijah the prophet, but we never mention, remember ye the law of Moses. And then he uses these words where it's statutes and judgments. It's those patterns, it's those principles that still apply. A legal statute or something like that is very general in the way that it applies a principle. It lays out the facts. And he uses those words in describing the law of Moses. And it's he's clearly emphasizing it. He's not diminishing it. And I think we should really take note of his words here. Okay, why is all this stuff important? Simply put, if we are blind, as the scriptures warn us against the state of being in, we can very well fulfill what C.S. Lewis talked about, where you can have people running about with fire extinguishers during times of flood. If it's a flood, we have to be aware of it. We have to be looking at it clearly. And if we identify the problems clearly because we can see, because we're not blind leaders of the blind leading each other into ditches, then we can appropriately discuss appropriate solutions. Now, there might be different ideas. It's not a guarantee that we will always be right. But the fact is we will better be able to see and better be able to act because we can see clearly. The words should not be ignored, and we should do everything we can to open our eyes and take more seriously the things which God has given us. That is my message for you.